All right. I think we're a couple minutes past start time here. So I'm going to go ahead and get things kicked off. Okay. So welcome, everybody. Happy Tuesday. Happy Cinco de Mayo. My name is Kelsey Wilson, and I'm an account manager at Netbase Quid, and I'm going to be moderating today's session. So we're going to get into who Netbase Quid is before we talk through some of the things that we're going to discuss today and hear from our partners who are joining us for today's session. So for those of you who do or do not know Netbase Quid, we are a social media and news analytics platform that people and companies like some of you joining us today use to really understand consumer and market data. So let's get into a little bit more of what that looks like. So we work with a variety of different companies, agencies, brands, market research, consulting, and they really use our platform to inform some key use cases that really drive decisions across a variety of teams, right? So some of these use cases are more focused on the brand and company itself. So things like brand health and perception, competitive share of voice and intelligence, crisis management, campaign strategy. And some of the other use cases are more focused on the industry overall, right? So how can we use what consumers are saying to inform product innovation, to understand the trends within an industry? And outside of these, there's a ton of other ways that clients are using it as well. So how do we do that? How do we get that information? So our customers have access to over 350 million sources across over 51 months of historical data. And I like to say, when I'm chatting with people, you hear the word social listening or news analytics, and through that viewpoint, you think it's, just social media. You're just getting like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram data, or just news data. But Netbase Quid is so much more than that. So you have access to the full Reddit feed. You have consumer reviews, professional reviews, blogs. And you can see here, you also have access to things like pulling in your own data and being able to see that side by side with some of the real-time and online things that people are saying. And all of this is streamlined for you and very easy to dissect the information and start to make key decisions. So everything's real time across all of our products, and they're all fully interactive as well, allowing you to be super agile with what you're seeing and some of the questions you might have, being able to really jump from one thing to the other and also get super in depth with some of the questions that you have. Our products really allow users to quickly and easily share updates as they're happening, and help provide meaningful insights to, key decision makers, the executive team, and really inform some of the things that are going out to consumers. So that's just a little bit about who Netbase Quid is. I'd like to talk a bit more about the session and who's joining us today for that, because that's going to be some exciting stuff. So the session today is going to be focused on a little bit of a Q&A with some of our partners, and I'll introduce them in just a second. But the Q&A is going to focus on, how are they using social listening to inform their strategy for their clients? So we're having a couple of our agency partners joining us today, and I'm sure everybody who's joining us and listening in is aware that strategies are changing very quickly right now, more than ever. So obviously something like a Netbase Quid is very important to have throughout the year, and to be able to understand what should inform your strategies and how you can shift strategies based on what consumers are saying. But now more than ever, people are online and on social talking. So it's important to be able to listen into those things and be able to quickly shift and pivot your strategy based on that. So without further ado, I'm going to hop in and introduce you to our two speakers today. So Brandon Billings is joining us. He's the VP of Social Media and Content Strategy at MMGY. And for those of you who don't know, MMGY is an integrated marketing company who specializes in travel, tourism, and hospitality. So very important right now for them to have a pulse on what people are saying. We're also joined by Laura Forrester, who's the VP of Strategy Engagement at Chemistry. And Chemistry is also a full-service agency. They work with a variety of clienteles, both local and national. I'm going to have both of them tell you a little bit more about themselves. And yeah, let's get into it. So I think Brian's added them in here. Let me stop sharing. Hopefully the light behind me isn't blinding anybody just yet. Okay. Brandon, Laura, can you both hear me?
Sure can.
Yep.
Okay. So I'd love for both of you to give a little bit more background on yourself. Laura, would you mind starting just telling us who you work for? Obviously Chemistry, but a little bit more about Chemistry, your role, and how you're using social analytics within your organization.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everybody. Day one of Social Media Week 1. How exciting. As Kelsey mentioned, my name is Laura Forrester. I am the Director of Strategy and Engagement at Chemistry. Chemistry is a bi-metropolitan agency with offices in Pittsburgh and Atlanta. We also have a multicultural arm in Miami that focuses on the Latin American experience and what those trends mean for brands and their audiences. We don't really like to think of ourselves as a traditional advertising agency, but rather as a culture lab that creates ideas that helps brands connect with their target. And to do that in today's sort of constantly evolving real-time digital universe of sort of over-communication, channel fragmentation, you really have to understand broader culture, where it's moving, how to become and stay relevant within that framework. And how we do that is really through partners like Netbase Quid. We get to do that by focusing our brainstorms and campaigns on that human truth and using social analytics in partnership with our human-centered design training allows us to service clients across the board, whether that's creative or digital, through those types of data touch points, regardless of how you partner with us. So really excited to talk about building campaign strategies today with you.
Yes. I'm excited to hear a little bit more about the HCP stuff that you were talking about.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Brandon, can you share a little bit about yourself as well?
Yeah. So I'm Brandon Billings, as Kelsey mentioned. Super excited to be here, of course, as well on day one, the inaugural SMWONE, of course. So it's always exciting. I think from my side, I have 20 years of experience, social digital. With MMGY, we are a full service agency, offices globally. As Kelsey mentioned, we specialize in travel. That's what we do. That's what we know. Basically, if you look across kind of the travel and hospitality vertical, we have a client just about in every sector, and really have kind of our pulse on what's happening in the industry. How are things shaping? How are we really moving forward? From the social side, on my side, we have offices, social team members in New York, Kansas City, and Austin. We're a full service social agency, from, creating that overarching strategy to building, creative executions, really informed as Laura said, kind of by that human truth, and how do we start to build that, and really understanding what are our consumers looking for, and how do we start to really build impactful campaigns that in today's day and age of where we are, especially in this crisis mode, how do we start to really leverage listening to understand what are people talking about? How do we look at this from a voice of traveler standpoint and really get down to the most meaningful information? And from a social analytics, it's just such a key thing for us to really, from shaping the strategy, understanding performance, reacting in real time, which is where we have to be. And then at the end of the day, how are we building against plans that have business goals that we do have qualified measurement against it? So, I think, just as Laura said, I think, social listening is such a critical element for us of just really being able to understand what is that voice of traveler, what are they talking about really across our, many clients that we have, again, across all verticals within the travel hospitality sector.
Yeah, I think the voice of the consumer throughout all of this, and even before this, is one of the most important things, right? So I know today we want to start by talking a little bit more about how strategies have been altered, right? And one of the key questions I always get is a real world example, right? People want to hear from start to finish, what happened, where did the questions start? What was your process and what was the outcome, right? So I think, Laura, we talked a little bit earlier this week about some of the things you've been working on. Can you explain a little bit more about how you've had to change your strategies and use social listening? I think you mentioned for a utility client during the public health crisis, and I think something about a damaging storm.
Yeah, absolutely. So as we know, a utility, whether that's water, gasoline, electricity, really plays sort of a trusted role as an energy provider, regardless of sort of the sort of cultural context, and really a partner in the community. So just to give some context, in Western Pennsylvania, here in Pittsburgh, we're not particularly known for catastrophic storms or major weather events in our region. Luckily, at least like once every decade and a half or so. So we had a new client partnership starting sort of the beginning of this year, so 50 days into our partnership, and 2 to 3 weeks into sort of isolation, becoming sort of the realities of a pandemic and how that's impacting the utility space. And in that 2 to 3 weeks of into isolation, we had one of the 4th most historic storms in our area. We had 80-mile-per-hour winds, which was the highest winds that our international airport had ever trafficked. There were 2 small tornadoes in Western Pennsylvania. So basically what happened is we poured gasoline onto a really critically sensitive communications timeframe. So when we're thinking about using social listening to shift strategies, not just in response to sort of pandemic and quarantine, but we were shifting in addition to making sure that people had power. What does that look like? How are we restoring power? So our strategies really had to shift from this broadcast approach, talking about utilities as thought leaders, and much more into sort of an individual approach. So our agency really steward a community forward approach from the customer perspective versus from the utility perspective. And so from a listening perspective, we are often future-minded when we're talking about what we want to talk about, who we want to target. But during the realities of a public health crisis plus a storm, we had to really shift to be mindful of that sort of immediate reassurance.
Yeah, I think that's really important, especially now when people are feeling like they don't really have control over a lot of the things, and just making them feel comfortable and getting stuff back up and running as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
So I think shifting from the utility stuff and some of the things you guys have been experiencing, Brandon, more into travel, which is usually something that is so fun and exciting for people. And I think a lot of folks are obviously sad that they can't travel right now, but also trying to anticipate when things are back up and running and trying to keep that engagement going, even though people aren't able to do that. So explain the process for some of the travel brands that you guys work with. I know Travel Texas, Visit Rhode Island, Costa Rica, how you're using social listening to reshape those approaches.
Yeah, for sure. I think social's always really on the front line of this. I mean, we're the first in, from a travel sector, we're the first impacted. I'll say from an international side, we've actually been looking at watching, the spread of COVID and how how are internationally people reacting to it? What's the conversation thread that's happening? What are they talking about? As it kind of moved in domestically, then we started to see, okay, how is it impacting travel? Are they delaying? Are they canceling? Are they postponing? And how, from a conversation thread, do we understand that? And how do we create that, from that and shifting that, we have our core fundamental elements that make up, what are we trying to do from a business strategy? But again, how do we start to then adapt? So it's not so much that we're really trying to abandon, the core strategies that we've built with these clients, but how do we start to evolve and how do we start to message? We from MMGY, we have kind of the 4 phases that we've identified: the wait, the ready, the set, and go. And really within each one of those, having social measurement built in, that we're understanding, okay, when they're in this wait, when they're in this hold state, what are they talking about? And how do we then start to create content and programs that, will eventually, as we think about, Travel Texas, things are just starting to open back up in Texas. Rhode Island's a little bit different. Costa Rica's a little bit different. But how do we start to really build impactful content and programs that really entertain fans, that it's still, it has those foundational strategic elements that we really build out for these core partners that we always have to be building against. But, having that where it's not so much travel now, but, book now, travel later, and really adjusting. And from a messaging standpoint, having that where, we're just adapting, but we are leaning into what are people talking about? What are the things that, excites them about the destination, and how do we still fulfill that from an inspiration standpoint, that we are driving future travel, that we are kind of really having those, just to your point, the emotion, and we'll talk a little bit about that later, but the emotion in which people have been reactive, how their travel plans have been impacted it's pretty unreal and pretty, it's just tough. Even to the point of, from a local standpoint, that, a lot of what we've done across social, listening to these travel partners, them talk, we become that economic driver, that it's so critical from a business perspective that we're creating this when there is so much of an economic, impact that's happened through this, that how do we become, that beacon of economic, enterprise that can spur, everything across the board and really lead to growth as we kind of move forward and emerge from this and move into recovery and get in that go phases.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm just taking a couple of notes on follow-up questions for you guys, because I think it's really interesting, because something like this isn't in the social playbook, right? For every customer, this is something where you really have to be agile and think on your feet about how you're going to pivot things, right? And how you're going to make sure to communicate this and help your customer feel like you're doing everything you can, for them to help their consumers feel like they're doing everything they can, right? And I have a couple of other questions for you guys, but I'm curious, Brandon, you mentioned something about, social measurement, and for both of you, do you feel like that was something, conversations you had to have with clients where they didn't have social measurement scoped into their contract? Is that something on the fly you guys were starting to offer to people, or just proactively go out and do that to make sure they knew you, as a partner, you guys are looking out for them?
I can talk a little bit about that. I'll give you the example of Travel Texas. I think, social listings foundational just about everything that we do for our clients. It's one of the core services that we offer. With Travel Texas, it was about, we create, 1 to 2 page sheets that are really, really intense, that here's the global impact, here's the domestic impact, and here's how it looks like as we think about Travel Texas, and how is this moving across the state, and what's the impact, and then being able to show to them, here's in real time where things are happening. Even from a dashboard and some of those things, those are with some of our international clients. We have Los Cabos, where we have dashboards built out for them to be able to then see. But it's very important that from a measurement side, we're starting to see not only how are we leaning into it, but now that we're, as we're moving, kind of stair-stepping into recovery, what are the people talking about? One of the things we found that, while they can't go on vacation, we saw a huge uptick in people just dreaming to be on vacation, and thinking in that, and how does content and just vernacular from what consumers are saying across social, and how does that influence?
Mm-hmm. And I know we're going to come back to that, but I'm also curious, Laura, from you. are there new social playbooks that your team is coming up with to help with this, and how is that being communicated to your clients?
Sure. And I think from at least a communications approach, when you have sort of the public health crisis, and then over top of that regionally and sort of with a client, sort of a major weather event, our week over week volume of conversations increased by almost 1,000%. So when you think about a utility, they're not just powering the lights, they're really powering your home, your way of life, your chargers, your computers, your fridges. And so when we're thinking about how do we make sure that we're not just sharing analytics, but being mindful of the stories we're telling them and how frequently we're communicating, we had originally wanted to push for this one-to-one communication. As you guys know, community management in particular is such a critical aspect of brand reputation and the measurement that we're offering. And so we committed to answering as many as possible. So if you think about all these people who are now, in addition to the sort of stresses of a pandemic, also are worried about the contents of their freezer and their fridges. So I think it's really important what Brandon said before, that we don't abandon those sort of foundational strategies we already built. I often learn that you plan for what you can so you can react to what you have to or what you must. If we think about sort of planned content calendars bi-monthly or quarterly, you really totally need to shift to sort of a proactive approach. And so for us, that responding to customers, we actually had something like a 400% increase in content publishing volume during that time frame. So to be able not just to pivot from a publishing perspective, but also that sort of analytics, sort of the showing the impact of that content is really important.
Absolutely. So I guess just going back to the dreaming question too, and it's funny, I feel like we're talking about dreams and we're also talking about like needs, right? So if we're thinking about that Maslow's hierarchy, I might be mispronouncing that. It's just interesting how different companies reach different points of that. So Brandon, tell us a little bit more about the dreaming and some of the things that you guys uncovered using social listening in Netbase.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I mean, I think as we've kind of moved through these phases, you saw kind of what it said. You saw the delay, the cancellation, and then you saw that element of really wanting to get into that, I'm just dreaming of being on vacation, and really talking about that from an emotional state. The need, the want, everything that you start to see from that, eventually we'll get into that really starting to then start to be able to track against, I've booked my trip. I'm excited to go on my trip. How does that adjust? I think two key things that we've noticed within the last week, travel, what you said earlier, is supposed to be this exciting, this fun, and it is. But I think from where we've seen with just emojis and how people have really shown this true emotion that it's just disrupted their lives. I've never seen such downtrodden emojis that we've pulled when talking about travel, that they're just emotionally spent. And it's all very personal, and it's all, from there. The other side is we've started to really pull in some of the AI social mood that you guys just rolled out. And if I look at just general travel and we look at people talking about it, there's anticipation, but then there's also disgust because they're so upset that their plans were, such uprooted and such changed and put in this situation.
Mm-hmm. So I know we do have a little video about one that you did find. Are we able to pull that up and share it? Do you want to talk through that story a little bit? And then Laura, I have the same question for you after that.
So hopefully the technology will work. Costa Rica is one of our clients. And I don't know, hopefully people have seen this. But these two little girls, if we can push play, I don't know how to do it. Maybe I can do it.
Oh, can I push play?
Oh, is it playing? Okay. So these two little girls, one of the things we found from listening, part of the Natalia out of my New York office actually found this clip through social listening, and it's these two girls that are basically. Whoops.
Uh-oh. It might not play, but Brandon, I'll let you kind of voice over it, and guys, I'll send it in the chat too, so you guys can see it afterwards.
Yeah. So we found this tweet of these two little girls that basically recreated their trip to Costa Rica in their basement. I think it took them 2 weeks to do. They recreated the whole thing, and really documented, here's what they're seeing as they go. They were so upset, but then at this point, how do they take that excitement and turn that into, just anticipation to be going later? But again, what we did was we took this tweet and then really put the power of, campaigns, marketing, this integrated lens where we took this real-time action of these two little girls. Let's play that up. Let's build this excitement. And, we carried it through PR where, Good Morning America actually featured it on their site. And we also built some as it's part of our core campaign elements to really, again, we're all in this together. We're all experiencing it. Let's really, be empathetic to what's happening, but also let's have fun, because that's what travel's about. And if we can give these moments of lightheartedness and fun that really lifts spirits, and again, kind of spurs travel down the road, but have it come really from that voice of customer. So it's just a fun thing.
And I love to see. Oh, sorry, Brandon, you were cutting out for a second. I was just going to say, I love to see it going from across all ages, right? And parents sharing that type of stuff online also then instigates ideas for other people to try to make the best out of the situation. So I guess, Laura, same thing for you. I mean, tell us a little bit about how Netbase has been helpful for identifying some of these real-time opportunities. Have you guys been able to identify that for some of your customers' similar scenarios?
Sure, absolutely. So I think something that was important to us for the utility in particularly, social listening started to reveal sort of community stresses or commonalities. Because as you can imagine, if the lights go out, that feels very personal to you. You now have to take a shower in the dark. But other people are also experiencing that kind of sort of panic. So what we started to see is we had these sort of themes or commonalities that Netbase Quid really allows you to understand, whether that's food fear or sanitation or the sense of time or control. We started to see just sort of outage reporting. What is the official process for that? What do vulnerable communities look like? So if you imagine sort of a whole region impacted by a storm, there are sort of restoration priorities, sort of public sort of safety issues, big sort of hospitals or operations that still have to stand. So social listening allowed us to see these commonalities and then start to communicate how we're addressing those. So when restoration time is happening, how to report outages, how to make sure that they understand as a community how we prioritize turning on power, and just ultimately sort of a sense of making sure that there was this in it together aspect Brandon had mentioned, because we're also reminding folks that restoration is also now impacted by social distancing. We can't send full crews out because of the sort of parameters that are put in place. So this reminder of the collective was really important. And when we got to see from not just an individual experience, but that collective commonality rise to the top in the net-based listening, we got to shift those proactive strategies to kind of address some of those issues.
Oh man. Yeah, I can only imagine having to, and it's weird saying this because I feel very, very privileged. I always have power usually, but I'm sure people who always have power, and then the power goes out and you're already stuck at home. You're like, what am I going to do? I don't have enough books to read. So I'm sure it's always nice to be able to listen and see what people are saying and then come up with content to help reassure that the company's there for them, right? And they're working hard to get everything back up and running. I have so many other questions I want to ask you guys, but I'm going to jump ahead because I know we're coming up on time and I want to make sure I get to some of the chat room questions as well. So, I mentioned earlier social listening, right? So sometimes people think social listening is just social. But Netbase Quid does offer you a lot of other sources. I'm curious, I guess, Brandon, we can start with you, and then Laura, we can go to you. But where are you guys finding the conversations that matter most? And that could be now. It could even have been before this. So maybe talking a little bit about if there's been shifts and where you guys are seeing some of these conversations happening within the sources that you have available to you. and NetBase or, others as well. So I don't know, Brandon, do you want to start with that and then we can kick it over to Laura?
Yeah. I mean, I'll tell you, there's elements just within the platform, like we use the news side a lot just to try and understand. I think one of the things we were just working with a client on that talking about, here's what the news is talking about as we think about you from a brand identity. But then here's also what's influencing the news. So it's looking at kind of the news side, but then also who's influencing that and how do we do reverse lookups and how do we start to understand that? I think Twitter, you always get a ton of information through Twitter. Some, I think that comes with the good and the bad, and you got to figure out how to weed that out. I think one of the things that we learned initially, just as we were kind of getting into this and the impact, we actually saw an uptick in conversations through Instagram that we normally hadn't, which was interesting in people, because Instagram for travel is such an emotional and like visual that then you started to see people just talking about how it was impacting their vacation. So I think that's part of it. And then I think just the niche, as we think about Reddit and some of that, as you kind of get into kind of that niche area and how do you kind of get into the gleaning of really that channel specific.
Yeah. Laura, what about you guys? Where are you seeing most of the conversations? Have you seen any shifts on your end?
Yeah, and I think what's ultimately happening sort of channel agnostically is there's a shift in sort of reprioritization of who or what is influential. Even conversations like politically about what is essential, those are happening on what is influential from a digital perspective too. The sort of, again, I think empathy being a tenet overall, there's this rise of the everyday. So there had been a movement from influencers being sort of those with large followings or celebrity clout. And now there's this sort of micro influencer. We see them on different channels, whether that's Instagram or Twitter. There's this rise of the everyday, which I think is going to be a shift that perseveres post-pandemic. Kind of long live the home baker and sourdough starters, right?
Yeah, the amateur, we're all amateur cooks now.
So there's this, and I think it'll be interesting to see how that influence shift from like escapism to sort of home life or work life. That I think is going to be a really interesting thing to watch.
Yeah, I know I've been spending way too many hours on TikTok, but I have learned a lot from it. It's giving me some good laughs. Okay, so we have about 8 minutes left. I'm going to ask a couple of the questions that I'm seeing here. So let me ask you first, Laura. How do you use social listening or analytics tools to measure the success of a campaign? And what are the KPIs that you're tracking?
Sure. I think that's a really great conversation. And so the social analytics tools, generally NetBase becomes sort of our heavy hitter as far as the tools are concerned. But we also love to use tools directly from the channels as well. So they come with a robust sense of data already. And I think when we're talking about KPIs and which metrics, ultimately to take a step back, you have to also understand what brand metrics are you trying to impact first. So are you looking at awareness? Are you looking at conversion? And how is that laddering back up to your overall business data? And then from there, you can look at the sort of machine as a whole and say, okay, if I need to drive awareness, I'm most likely going to be looking at impressions, reach, time on site. So I feel like first aligning on what is that overall brand and business goals, and then from there, taking a look at what the channels measure well, and sort of making sort of a plan from there.
And that was by Tegan Fardell. Apologies, I forgot to say that to kick that off. And it's interesting that you bring that up. I think a lot of times folks don't think about what each KPI is going to be different per industry or per client, right? So one of the things I always ask back is, well, what action are you looking to take based on this, right? So that's more from a strategy perspective. When you're doing the actual measurement piece, I think that also comes into play. Brandon, there's one specifically for travel, so I'm going to shift to that one, and then we can always come back to the other one. This is from Caitlin Weaver. She asked, as a travel-focused agency, how are you reassuring your clients that social is a main driver for future travel during this economic crisis? And how they, why should they continue spending budget on social?
Yeah. I mean, I'll tell you, if you look at the data itself, right? I mean, let's start with data. the amount of time that people are spending on social media right now is unreal. We all have time on our hands. We're all looking for an escapism. We know we're stuck in our homes. We have the stay-at-home orders. I know some of those are lifting. I think that's a core element. Foundationally, we know that social does, it does spur travel. It does create economic impact. I mean, we see it from, everything that we do. I think some of the things, just from a measurement side, we did a content series with Travel Texas that was built on, Taco Tuesdays. And I think there's an element, what we saw and what we actually found out from Netbase was, of all the trending content happening on Taco Tuesdays, all of a sudden Travel Texas started to appear within it based on the engagements that we saw, based on the influence that we had. And then being able to link that back to future travel and how do we start to use it. I think there's elements as you think about, that's the golden question is, how do we then tie measurement into economic data? And we definitely, from our source, we have our own data sources that we run against that really, Portrait of American Traveler, that will tell us, it definitely spurs travel. It definitely drives economic recovery. And it's a core thing. I mean, we've seen from some of our partners that, just the benefit that we had. I was on a call with a statewide partner and they were talking, following it, they were just so complimentary of the work that's happening, because I think that's my team. I'm like, we have to remember that what we're doing is driving recovery. That we're playing such a core part in what's happening today. And that social, again, is that we have to move fast, you have to go. But at the end, what's the business problem we're trying to solve? What's the measurement we're going to do? And really, going from there. But there's an element of you just got to go right now.
Right. Yeah. I have one more and then we'll probably try to wrap things up. We've got about 4 more minutes. So this is from Unique Dawkins. I hope I pronounced that correct. How can you encourage consumers to generate content without outrightly asking them to do so? For example, posting a video to win a prize. So kind of like, we'll start with you, Laura, but kind of like the Costa Rica stuff, like they're generating this on their own, but how do we get other people to do things like that, right? Like, how do we get people to post stuff about some of the power outage stuff and maybe in a different way than complaining or things like that, right?
Sure, absolutely. And I think without sort of a call to action or sort of a not necessarily incentive, but this sort of need to kind of promote that. Something that we started to see in particular with the utility is that we, as a brand, committed to that one-to-one communication and responding directly to folks and sharing not only sort of education about sort of the state of the storm status, but also this idea that to watch for the helpers, right? And to think about sort of patience for the linemen who are actually out there restoring power. And while it sounds kind of like a nightmare at the time, ultimately we saw the community start to share videos of the linemen driving through the neighborhoods and cheering for them and signs for them. So I think when we're focusing on empathy and saying, hey, we're here for you, that sort of desire to respond kind of empathetically back is really the best way to encourage people passively to share content outside of sort of a full sort of user-generated content push. It's sort of like, hi, we're here for you. And then all of a sudden your whole community is like, yes, I saw you doing what you said you were going to do.
Yeah, I think it's so much about community, and that's what everybody's looking for, right? They don't necessarily just want to hear from the brand or the company itself. They want to know that you're listening to them and that you care about them, and that's why they're reacting, right? So, Brandon, I don't know if you have something in 30 seconds to say about that.
Yeah, I think it comes down to kind of what Laura said. It's about emotion and about creating that emotion that people want to react to. I mean, like, what a lot of the stuff we're doing is, with Los Cabos, we're actually having across their Facebook page today, this afternoon, we're having a celebration around Cinco de Mayo. And, who doesn't love a nice margarita in Mexico and Los Cabos? I mean, raise my hand, I'm there. But what you'll start to see is those are natural occurrences where then people start to share that. They'll start to attach friends into it. They'll share it with them saying, hey, look at this. We totally got to do this. This is, once we can get together, these are the things we're going to do. So it's about creating just that emotional content that people just naturally want to engage with. You know, we can build campaigns around it too, but I think it really has to start with that heart element of how do we connect with, to the point of the community, with the locals, with the community, those, you know, those hardcore, those resilient travelers that are going to get out there, that are going to lead this recovery and help rebound everybody.
I know I'll be right there with a margarita in hand once it comes back around. Well, I know
Right?
we're right at the 30-minute mark. Everybody, thank you so much for joining today. We really appreciate it. We hope you got some insight out of this. Feel free to connect with us on LinkedIn, message us. We're always happy to continue the conversation, and I hope the rest of Social Media Week goes well for everybody. Thanks, guys. Hope you have a margarita and maybe a taco today for Taco Tuesday. Brian, I don't know if there's anything else we need to do to wrap up, but I think we should be good to go.